I used to believe that silence meant peace, that the quiet moments we shared were a sign of comfort, of security. My wife, my beautiful, fragile wife, was blind. She had been since the accident. I had built my world around that fact, around the belief that there were things she would never see. For years, I thought I had nothing to hide. And for years, I let my secrets breathe right there in the open. I spoke too freely, moved carelessly, lived as if no shadow of guilt could follow me. Because how could it? She couldn't see. Or so I thought. That night started like any other. I walked through the door, loosened my tie, and exhaled the weight of the day. The scent of something warm lingered in the air, roasted garlic maybe, or butter melting over fresh bread. She always cooked, always made sure there was something waiting for me. It was one of the few constants in our marriage. "A long day?" she asked, her voice soft as always. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah." I leaned down, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. A habit, a gesture of routine rather than affection. She smiled, tilting her face just slightly. I didn't notice it then, that tiny movement, that barely perceptible tilt. But looking back now, I realize she had been watching me. We ate dinner at the small table in the center of the kitchen. Candles flickered, casting shadows across the walls. I talked about work, about the emails, the deadlines, the stress, and she listened. She always listened. I never thought to question it. I was careless even then. Letting my words spill out, assuming she wouldn't catch the meaning behind them. The weight of my sighs. The tension in my voice when I mentioned a certain coworker's name. The way I hesitated just slightly before answering certain questions or mentions. She was blind, so I never considered, not for a second, that she had already started piecing together the truth. After dinner, I poured myself a drink, something strong, something smooth. I swirled the glass in my hand, watching the way the light bent through the amber liquid. My wife sat across from me, hands folded neatly in her lap. "Anything on your mind?" she asked. It was an innocent question, too innocent. Too innocent. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "No, just tired," she nodded. "You always are." I remember looking at her then, really looking at her. The way the candlelight caught the edges of her hair, the way the soft glow painted her skin, she was beautiful. But there was something else that night, something different. An awareness. A presence that shouldn't have been there. I took another sip of my drink, letting the warmth settle in my chest. You ever wonder how different things would be if that accident never happened? Her fingers tightened around her napkin, just slightly. A twitch, a reaction so small I almost missed it. Sometimes," she said. "But what's the point in wondering?" I shrugged, my gaze drifting past her, settling on the window behind her shoulder. "I don't know. Just thinking out loud." She smiled again, but there was something strange about it. A knowing curve to her lips, a softness that felt practiced. I didn't see it then, but I should have. Because my wife, my blind, fragile wife, had already started to see me for who I really was, and I had no idea that by the end of that night, she would know everything. I remember the way the ice clinked against the glass as I swirled the last sip of whiskey. The room was still, wrapped in that familiar evening hush, broken only by the distant hum of the fridge and the rhythmic ticking of the clock above the stove. It was the kind of silence I had come to love, the kind where I could exist without thinking too much, without filtering my words or watching my steps. Because she couldn't see. At least, that's what I believed. "You're quiet tonight," she murmured, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "Sas, I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. "You say that like it's unusual." She tilted her head, listening, really listening. "It is. Usually by this time you've had enough to drink to start talking, telling me things." My stomach tensed, but I hid it with a lazy grin. "Like what?" She smiled, but there was something sharp beneath it. "Oh, just little things. About work, your friends, the people you spend your time with." The way she said it, it felt like a test, a hook, waiting for me to bite. But I didn't. Instead, I sighed and stretched my arms over my head. "You make it sound like I have some wild, scandalous life." "Trust me, it's boring." She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I don't know. I think people tend to be more interesting when they think no one's watching." A strange thing to say. My fingers tightened around my glass just slightly. Maybe it was the whiskey making me paranoid, but I felt a sudden, unfamiliar sensation crawling over me. Something about the way she sat, so still, so calm. She wasn't fumbling for her fork or reaching out to feel where her glass was. She wasn't hesitating. Something about the way she held herself felt different. I shrugged off the thought and pushed myself up from the chair. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my drink as I made my way to the living room. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I sank onto the couch. I let my head fall back, closing my eyes, feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle in my veins. And then, soft footsteps. I opened my eyes just as she entered the room, her movements smooth, effortless. She sat beside me, not reaching out for the armrest or feeling for the edge of the couch the way she usually did. She just sat. A shiver ran down my spine. I had seen her do this 1,000 times before, but something about tonight felt different. Why do you look so tense? She asked, tilting her head in my direction. I forced a chuckle. I don't know what you mean. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she shifted, angling her body just slightly toward me. You know, she said after a moment, her voice soft, almost playful. I think it's funny how people change when they think no one's looking. There it was again. That same unsettling phrase. I stared at her, my grip tightening around the glass in my hand. The air in the room felt different, heavier, like I was standing at the edge of something, but I didn't know what. You keep saying that, I murmured. Why? She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. And then, with a sigh, she leaned back against the cushions, her fingers idly tapping against the fabric. I just wonder, she said, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. How many things you've done in front of me, believing I'd never know. A chill ran through me. Something about the way she said it, so deliberate, so precise, made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard, forcing out a laugh. What are you saying? You think I have secrets? She exhaled slowly, tilting her head as if she were considering the question. I think. We all do. A silence. A thick, suffocating silence. I shifted on the couch, suddenly desperate to change the subject. Do you want me to grab you some tea? I offered. It might help you sleep. She nodded. That would be nice. I stood quickly, eager to put distance between us to shake off the strange, unsettling tension pressing against my chest. But as I reached for her cup on the table, I hesitated, and that's when I saw it, her water glass, still full. Untouched. I frowned. My wife never left a drink untouched. She hated waste. I glanced back at her, sitting perfectly still, her lips curled in that same unreadable smile. She knew something. I could feel it. And suddenly, a terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if she had been watching me all along? I carried the tea back into the living room, my steps slower than before. My mind felt like it was unraveling, a frayed thread pulling loose with each passing second. I shouldn't have been nervous. I had nothing to hide. At least, that's what I kept telling myself, but her glass, untouched. And the way she moved, something wasn't right. She reached for the tea, her fingers wrapping around the cup with practiced ease. I watched carefully, searching for hesitation, for some sign that she was still the same woman I'd known all these years, but she didn't fumble, didn't feel around for the handle. She just took it, smooth, confident, precise. I forced a smile. Do you always did love chamomile? She nodded, blowing gently over the surface of the tea. It's comforting. Her voice was steady, unreadable. It sent a shiver down my spine. I sat down across from her, gripping my own drink a little too tightly. My mind was racing. Every single moment from the past few months replaying like a film reel in my head. Had I done anything? Had I said anything? Yes. Of course I had. I had lived in this house fully exposed under the belief that she was blind. She was blind. I had taken calls in front of her, whispered things into the phone at odd hours of the night. I had rolled my eyes, smirked to myself, sighed in relief knowing she'd never catch me. God, had I been so careless. I studied her face. She was calm. Too calm. Too calm. Like she knew something, but wasn't ready to say it yet. I was thinking, she said, setting the tea down. We should go away for a weekend. Just us. I blinked. What? Somewhere quiet. A cabin, maybe. Somewhere we can really talk. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. I swallowed hard, forcing out a laugh. Since when do you like the outdoors? She tilted her head, smiling softly. Since when do you assume I don't? I tried to brush it off, but the air in the room was shifting. I wasn't in control anymore. I needed to test something. Something small. Something that would confirm my growing suspicion. Slowly, I leaned forward, reaching toward the table, toward her teacup. I moved it an inch to the right, subtle enough that it would go unnoticed. If she reached for it and felt around, she was still blind. But if she went straight for it, I watched. She took a breath, kept talking as if nothing had happened, and then, without hesitating, she reached out and grabbed the cup exactly where I had moved it. My blood ran cold. I barely heard her words anymore. My pulse was pounding in my ears. She had seen me move it. She saw it. And she had done nothing. She hadn't gasped, hadn't slipped up, hadn't even reacted. She was hiding it. For how long? Days? Weeks? Months? I forced my expression to stay neutral, nodding as she spoke, but my mind was spiraling. I had to stay calm, had to think. If she had been able to see this entire time, that meant she knew. Knew about the things I had said when I thought I was alone. Knew about the nights I had stayed out too late. Knew about the calls, the sighs, the secrets I had let slip right in front of her. A sharp ringing filled my head. How much did she know? How much had she seen? I was suddenly terrified to find out. And yet, as I sat there, gripping my glass so tightly my knuckles turned white, she simply sipped her tea, eyes soft, lips curved in a small, patient smile. Like she was waiting for me to realize. Like she was enjoying every second of it. I could hear my own breathing. Slow, measured, controlled. At least I hoped it was. But inside I was spiraling. Every second that passed, every quiet glance she gave me, every little movement, it all felt like a trap. How long? How long had she been watching me? She took another sip of her tea, her lips barely touching the rim before she set it down again. "You look pale," she murmured, tilting her head slightly. "Is something wrong?" She knew. She was playing with me. I let out a breathy chuckle, running a hand over my face. No, just tired. She didn't blink, didn't nod, just kept looking at me. I swallowed hard. I had to act normal. Had to pretend like I wasn't slowly losing my mind, but I had to be sure. Had to confirm it beyond doubt. So I did something small. I glanced toward the bookshelf behind her, pretending to focus on something. I even let my brow furrow, as if I were deep in thought. And sure enough, her gaze followed mine. She looked, just for a second, just a flicker. But she looked, I felt like I was drowning. For months, maybe even longer, I had walked around this house believing I was invisible. I had spoken freely, acted without fear. I had told secrets to a woman I thought lived in the dark. But she wasn't in the dark. She had been watching the entire time. I clenched my jaw, pressing my fingers against the cool glass in my hand. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I forced my voice to stay level. "I think I'll take a shower," I said, standing up. "A long day." She smiled. "Of course." I walked out of the room slowly, deliberately. But the second I turned the corner, my movements changed, urgent, panicked. I needed to think. I needed to remember every single thing I had done in front of her. I locked the bathroom door behind me, gripping the sink with both hands as I stared at my reflection. My face was tense, my eyes slightly wild. I had made mistakes. Big ones, the phone calls, the lies, the whispers at night when I thought she was asleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the memories into place. What did she know? God, had she heard the conversations? Had she seen a noise? Soft? Distant? I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The creak of a floorboard. Right outside the bathroom door. I turned my head slowly, staring at the doorknob, my breath trapped in my throat. She was standing there, waiting, listening. I swallowed hard, heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't my home anymore. This was her game. And I had no idea how to win it. I stood there, gripping the sink so tightly my fingers ached. The silence outside the bathroom was deafening. She was there. I could feel it, standing just beyond the door, listening, waiting. My own wife. The woman I had spent years believing was blind, was watching me now in ways I never imagined. I forced my breath to steady, but my body refused to relax. What did she want? Did she want me to break? To confess? Or was she simply enjoying the torment, letting me unravel piece by piece? I turned on the faucet, letting the water run, trying to buy myself a moment to think. She knows something. She's always known something. But how much? The memory of her tracking my gaze across the room hit me like a punch to the gut. She had followed my eyes. She had moved for the cup when I shifted it. She had done everything a blind person shouldn't be able to do. And worst of all, she never told me. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling my pulse drum against my skull. How do you confront something like that? How do you sit across from someone who has been secretly seeing you for God knows how long? I shut off the water, my fingers damp as I gripped the door handle. I hesitated, and then a soft knock. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Her voice followed, light, gentle. Too gentle. Are you okay? I exhaled, pressing my forehead against the cool wood of the door. Yeah, just needed a second. Mamba, second. A beat of silence. Then, do you ever feel like people aren't who they say they are? My blood turned to ice. She was testing me. I swallowed, forcing out a low chuckle. I guess that depends on the person. Another pause. Then a quiet laugh. Yeah, she murmured. I suppose it does. Her footsteps moved away from the door. She wasn't trying to get in. She just wanted me to know she was there. I waited a few seconds before stepping out. She was in the bedroom now, lying on her side, the dim light of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across her face. Her eyes were closed. Or at least they appeared to be. I lingered in the doorway, watching her. Was she sleeping, or was she pretending? The same way she had been pretending all this time? I crept closer, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I needed to know. I leaned in, watching for the rise and fall of her breath, the tiniest movement, anything that would give her away. Then she spoke, soft, barely above a whisper. You should be careful, she murmured. My entire body locked up. Her eyes remained closed. But I knew deep in my bones she was awake. She had been awake this whole time. She turned slightly, just enough so that her face was half illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. People don't always stay blind forever, she said. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body screaming. She knew. She knew everything, and she was waiting for me to break. I stood frozen in place, her words clawing into my mind like icy fingers. People don't always stay blind forever. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to, because she already knew exactly what I was thinking. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the panic rising in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. She was telling me, plain as day, that she knew. That she knew. I forced myself to move, to breathe, to act like everything was normal. But what did normal even mean anymore? For months, maybe years, I had existed in this house believing I was unseen, that my mistakes, my secrets, my sins were locked away behind the illusion of her blindness. But she had seen everything. She had heard everything, and she had never said a word. Why? That question burned in my mind as I stood there, watching her breathe, watching her lie still beneath the sheets like none of this was happening. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to demand answers, but I didn't because there was something far more terrifying than the idea of her knowing my secrets. So they do. The fact that she had chosen to wait until now to tell me. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to stay even. You're saying that like it means something. She shifted slightly on the bed, a slow, almost lazy movement. Maybe it does, she murmured. She still wasn't looking at me. I clenched my jaw. God, are you trying to say something to me? The pause. Then, finally, she turned her head toward me, her eyes open and clear, fully focused on my face. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't faking it anymore. She wasn't pretending. She was letting me see her. I think, she said softly, you already know the answer to that. I felt my stomach drop. I tried to speak, to come up with something, anything, to turn the situation back in my favor. But I had nothing. The power had shifted. I wasn't in control anymore. She was. And she knew it. She let the silence linger, stretching between us like an invisible rope, tightening around my throat. Then, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, she turned onto her side, tucking the blankets up to her shoulder. I'm tired, she murmured. Good night. That was it. No accusations, no confrontation. Just that single, lingering truth sitting between us in the dark. She knew. She had always known. And yet, she was waiting. For me to confess. For me to break. Or maybe, for something much, much worse. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear, doubt, and one single terrifying truth. Been watching me. And been watching me. For how long? Days? Weeks? Years? Years, every breath I took felt too loud in the stillness of the room. You could hear her breathing beside me, slow, steady, peaceful, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her in the dim light from the window. She was facing away from me. Or at least I thought she was. I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't trust anything anymore. I wanted to wake her up. I wanted to demand answers. But I didn't. Because there was one thing I knew for sure. She had waited. She had waited for me to come to this realization on my own. She wanted me to suffer in the silence. She wanted me to feel the weight of every secret I had spilled in front of her. I closed my eyes, but my mind wouldn't shut down. Every memory, every whispered conversation, every single mistake I had made, it was all playing back now with new meaning. Had she seen me roll my eyes behind her back? Had she heard the way I scoffed when she asked me if I still loved her? Had she stood there in the doorway while I confessed things over the phone, thinking I was safe? God, I wanted to believe that I could talk my way out of this, that I could convince her she was wrong, but she wasn't. She had been inside my world. Unseen, unheard, then seen, unheard, unnoticed. And now I was the one who felt blind. The hours dragged. The air felt heavier with every passing second, and then she moved. Not much, just a shift in the bed. But it was enough to send a wave of cold fear crashing through my body, because for the first time since I'd learned the truth, I realized something far worse than anything I had imagined before. She wasn't just waiting for me to confess. She was deciding what to do next. She had seen everything. And now, I was at her mercy. Morning came slowly. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, painting long golden streaks across the walls. But the warmth did nothing to ease the chill in my bones. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, watching, listening, waiting. Midging. She moved beside me, stretching lightly beneath the sheets. For a moment, I let myself hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, last night hadn't happened, that maybe I had imagined it. Then she spoke. Did you sleep well? Her voice was soft, sweet, too sweet. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a weak chuckle. Not really you. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. I did. A lie. I knew that now. Because if she could fake blindness for so long, then how many other things had she faked? I pushed myself up in bed, running a hand through my hair. I needed to leave. Not forever, just for a little while, just to get space. To think. To figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Long day ahead, I muttered, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. I should get going. A pause. Then, going where? Her tone was light. Curious, but there was something behind it. Something sharp. I forced a smile. Work? A slow, deliberate nod. Of course. I stood, moving toward the dresser, reaching for my watch. But my hands were unsteady. She was still lying in bed, watching me. Not pretending anymore. Not hiding. Just watching. And then, she said something that made my blood run cold. You never answered my question last night. I froze. Slowly, I turned back to her. She was sitting up now, her hands folded neatly in her lap. My heart pounded. What question? She tilted her head slightly, eyes locking onto mine with terrifying precision. The one I asked through the door? The memory hit me like a thunderclap. Do you ever feel like people aren't who they say they are? My mouth felt dry. I don't know what you mean. I lied. She smiled. A slow, knowing smile. And then, she spoke words that shattered me completely. I think you do. I couldn't breathe. The weight of my own secrets pressed down on me, suffocating. I had lied to her, betrayed her, underestimated her. And now, I was the one trapped. Her next words were barely above a whisper. Tell me the truth. Not a demand, not a plea. An opportunity. She was giving me a choice, to confess, or to keep playing the game. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could lie. I could deny everything. I could pretend like I didn't know what she was talking about, but deep down, I knew. I had already lost. She had seen me. She had heard me. She had known me better than I had ever known myself. I met her gaze. For the first time in my life, I truly saw her. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't waiting for an answer. She already knew it. She just wanted to see if I had the courage to say it out loud. And for the first time in years, I didn't know what to say. This is how it ends, not with a confrontation, but with the weight of an unspoken truth. She doesn't need him to confess, because she already won. He spent years thinking she was blind, but in reality, he was the one who never truly saw her.